I've been sitting here for the past 2 days watching something unfold on the world stage that I genuinely did not expect to see in my lifetime. And I want to talk to you tonight, not as a former president, but as a fellow American who has spent decades inside these rooms, behind these doors, at these tables, where deals either get made or they fall apart forever. Because what just happened between the United States and Canada is not a news story. It is not a trade dispute headline that scrolls across the bottom of your screen and disappears by morning. What just happened is a moment. But before moving forward, if you are genuine loyal to the country and want to be the most powerful and peace nation in the world, then subscribe to Racial MADDOW Facts channel and comment, where are you watching from? The kind of moment that gets studied in foreign policy classrooms 20 years from now. The kind of moment that changes how every country on earth calculates their relationship with the United States for a generation. Donald Trump begged Canada. I want you to sit with that for a second. The man who built his entire political identity, his entire brand, his entire mythology around never showing weakness, never asking, never needing anything from anybody. The man who spent the better part of 2 years telling Canada they should be honored to be the 51st state. The man who slapped tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum and called it a matter of national security. That man stood in front of the cameras and begged. And Mark Carney looked him in the eye in front of the entire world and said, "No, now I've been around long enough to know that moments like this don't happen in a vacuum. There's always a story behind the story. There's always a longer arc that explains how two countries that share the longest peaceful border on the planet ended up here in this place with this level of public rupture." And tonight, I want to walk you through all of it. What happened, what it means, and what I believe comes next. I want to do it honestly, the way I wish more people in public life would talk about these things, because the American people deserve honesty right now. Not spend, not branding, honesty. Let me tell you what I know about the United States and Canada, because I didn't just read about this relationship in briefing books. I lived it from behind that desk in the Oval Office. When I was president, I signed NAFTA into law in 1993. I remember that day. I remember what it meant. I remember the arguments on both sides. The labor unions worried about jobs going south. The economists arguing about efficiency and growth. The Canadians and Mexicans sitting across from us trying to figure out whether we were partners or predators. We chose partners, and for 30 years, that choice held. The United States and Canada built the largest bilateral trading relationship in the history of the world. $800 billion a year flowing back and forth across that border. Integrated supply chain so deeply interwoven that you cannot build an American car without Canadian steel. And you cannot run a Canadian energy sector without American capital. We are not just neighbors. We are each other's economic circulatory system. I understood that when I signed NAFTA. George W. Bush understood it. Barack Obama understood it. Even in his first term, with all the noise and all the tariff threats, there was still enough institutional memory on both sides to renegotiate rather than rupture that became USMCA in 2020. A new agreement, imperfect like all agreements, but functional, built on the recognition that you do not blow up a 30-year partnership over short-term political theater. But here's the honest truth about what has happened since then. Something broke. Not all at once, not dramatically. It broke the way trust always breaks. Slowly and then suddenly, tariff after tariff, insult after insult. The 51st state rhetoric that Canadians heard no. The suggestion that Canada was somehow taking advantage of the United States, that this foundational partnership was actually a bad deal, that our closest ally and largest trading partner was an adversary in disguise. And then the moment that I think truly changed the calculation in Ottawa forever, when Trump looked at Canadian leaders and said, essentially, you need us more than we need you. Sovereignty is negotiable. Your independence is a courtesy we extend. Canada heard that. Canada remembered it. And Mark Carney, who is not a career politician playing games, who is a man who ran the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, who understands global capital flows the way most people understand. Their grocery list, Mark Carney made a decision he was not going to come to the table from a position of fear. So when people ask me, was this public rejection inevitable? I say no, it was never inevitable, but it became a lot more likely the day this administration decided that humiliating an ally was a strategy rather than a mistake. Now, let me walk you through what we actually know. Because in moments like this, facts matter more than anything. On March 4th, 2026, the United States imposed 25% tariffs on Canadian goods, citing national security and trade imbalance concerns. Canada responded immediately with retaliatory tariffs targeting $17 billion in American exports. American farmers in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin began feeling that almost immediately. Dairy farmers, auto part manufacturers, lumber companies, real people with real businesses built on 30 years of integrated trade. Within weeks, the economic data started coming in ugly. American consumer prices on goods with Canadian components began rising. Supply chains that took decades to build started showing stress fractures. American auto manufacturers began warning publicly that production timelines were being disrupted. Republican senators from border states started making phone calls that the White House did not enjoy receiving. And then the moment that nobody in the trade analysis community predicted the meeting, Trump and Carney face to face, cameras rolling, the entire diplomatic world watching. And here's where I need you to pay very close attention, because what Trump said in that meeting was not a negotiating position. It was not a strategic demand wrapped in tough language. What Trump did in that meeting was ask Canada to come back, to ease tensions, to find a path forward. He said in front of those cameras in language that every trade diplomat in every capital on earth immediately recognized for exactly what it was. He said he wanted a deal. He begged. And Carney, calm as a man who has studied global financial markets during crisis, looked at him and said, Canada will not be annexed. Canada will not negotiate under threat. Canada will engage as an equal partner, or Canada will not engage at all. The answer was no. Now, that last part, that is where things start to get genuinely complicated, because this was not just a diplomatic setback. This was a structural signal that the entire pressure campaign had failed. And I want to explain why that matters so deeply. Here's something I learned sitting in that chair. When you apply maximum pressure to an ally, you're making a bet. The bet is that their need for the relationship is greater than their need for self-respect. That bet works sometimes. It worked in certain trade negotiations in the 1990s. But it only works when the other side believes that backing down is survivable domestically. When you humiliate a partner publicly and repeatedly, you change their domestic political calculus entirely. You make it impossible for them to give you what you want, because giving you what you want now looks like surrender. Trump did not just apply pressure to Canada. He made pressure the whole relationship, and in doing so, he handed Mark Carney something extraordinary. He handed him a mandate. Because every Canadian who heard those 51st state jokes, every Canadian who watched their country be spoken about like a subordinate province, every Canadian who saw their national identity treated as a bargaining chip, they all became Carney's political backbone the moment he walked into that room. Carney did not say no, despite the political risk. He said no because of the political strength those insults had accidentally given him. Now, I want to talk about something that does not make headlines as easily as dramatic rejections and tariff numbers, but matters just as much, maybe more. What this moment does to the architecture of American global leadership. There's a reason the United States built a rules-based international order after World War II. We did it not because we were naive idealists, but because we were strategic realists who understood something fundamental. That a world of rules, even imperfect rules, is a world where American power compounds over time. That allies who trust you multiply your strength. that partners who fear you eventually find other partners. When I was president and we had trade disputes, and we had serious ones with Japan, with the European Union, with China in its early WTO days, we used mechanisms. We used the WTO dispute resolution process. We used bilateral negotiations conducted through proper channels with proper legal frameworks. Even when I was frustrated, even when I thought we were getting a bad deal, I understood that the process was not separate from the outcome. The process was part of the outcome. What happened in that room with Carney was the world watching the United States try to use presidential personality as a substitute for institutional strategy. And Canada said no, not just to the specific ask, no to the entire framework. Let me put it in terms that every American can understand. Imagine you have a business partner you have worked with for 30 years. You built something together, it works. Then one day you start telling people he is actually your employee. You start publicly demanding he restructure your agreement on your terms, or you will find ways to make his life difficult. You insult him at industry events. You question whether the partnership ever benefited you. And then, after all of that, you walk into a meeting and ask him to give you favorable terms because you need them. That partner is going to say no. Not because he cannot see the benefit of the relationship, but because, yes, at that point would cost him everything. That is what just happened on the world stage in front of every watching government, in front of Beijing, in front of Brussels, in front of every country that is now recalculating their own relationship with Washington. And that brings me to a question that I think has to be asked, even though asking it makes some people uncomfortable. Who benefits from this outcome? Not politically, I'm not going there, but strategically, because when the United States begs an ally and gets rejected publicly, there are actors in this world who watch that happen and see opportunity. China has spent 15 years trying to convince the global South that American leadership is unreliable. They just got a case study delivered to them free of charge. Russia watches NATO cohesion strain under the weight of an unpredictable Washington and files it away. Every country currently deciding whether to align more closely with American institutions or seek alternatives. Just watch Canada, a country that shares a 5,500-mile border with the States, say publicly that the relationship needs fundamental repair before business can resume. I'm not saying this to score points. I'm saying it because I believe the American people have a right to understand the full ledger of what these decisions cost. Now, let me tell you what keeps me up at night, because I think you deserve honesty about where this could go from here. Scenario one is the best case, and even the best case is harder than it sounds. Trump recalibrates. The administration quietly walks back the most aggressive tariff postures. Canada comes back to the table after seeing enough de-escalation to make engagement politically survivable for Carney. A new framework gets negotiated. Markets stabilize. The supply chains that were disrupted get rebuilt. American farmers and manufacturers who got caught in the middle get some relief. That is the best case. But even that scenario requires something this administration has not shown a great capacity for. Quiet de-escalation, giving ground without calling it victory, allowing the other side to walk back to the table with their dignity intact, because Carney cannot say yes to a deal that looks like capitulation any more than Trump can. The politics on both sides of that border are now locked. Getting to yes from here requires statesmanship. Real statesmanship, not a social media post. Statesmanship. Scenario two is what I think is most likely, if nothing changes, a prolonged economic standoff that grinds down both sides. The tariffs stay, the retaliation stays. American businesses that depend on integrated North American supply chains keep absorbing costs that eventually get passed to consumers. Canadian businesses adapt slowly and painfully, finding alternative markets in Europe, in Southeast Asia, in places that were previously secondary relationships. And here's the part that should concern every American, regardless of party. Canada is very good at finding alternative relationships when it has to. They have done it before. And every Canadian export dollar that flows toward Europe or Asia instead of the United States is a dollar of leverage we surrendered voluntarily. Meanwhile, the American businesses caught in the middle, the auto parts suppliers in Michigan, the dairy farmers in Wisconsin, the lumber companies in the Pacific Northwest, they keep absorbing costs and they keep making phone calls to their senators, and those senators keep having increasingly uncomfortable conversations with the White House. Scenario 3 is regional fracture. And I want you to understand, this is not hypothetical. The moment Canada said no, publicly, every member of the G7 updated their internal analysis of Washington. Our European allies are already managing their own tariff disputes with this administration. Japan is watching. South Korea is watching. If the image that solidifies in the minds of allied governments is that the United States applies maximum pressure, gets publicly rejected, and has no clear path to resolution, then the coalition democratic nations that has underwritten global stability for 80 years starts to develop fractures that bad actors will absolutely exploit. This is not abstract. This is how the post-war order actually breaks. Not in one dramatic moment, but in 100 recalibrations by 100 governments who quietly decide that Washington is too unpredictable to fully rely on. Scenario 4 is the one that concerns me most as someone who spent 8 years thinking about American power. Long-term strategic repositioning. Canada began systematically reducing its dependence on American markets. Not dramatically, not hostily, but methodically diversifying trade relationships, building alternative supply chain. Investing in domestic production capacity for categories where American supply was previously taken for granted. And in doing so, Canada begins a process that once started is very hard to stop. Regardless of what any future administration does, the relationship does not end, it diminishes. And a diminished relationship with Canada does not just cost us economically, it costs us the model. Because if Canada, the country that is culturally closest to us, historically most aligned with us, geographically bound to us, if Canada successfully demonstrates that reducing dependence on Washington is survivable and perhaps even strategically wise, then that demonstration is visible to every other country making similar calculations. You can win a tariff argument and lose the architecture of American influence at the same time. That is what I'm worried about. That is what keeps me up at night. Now, I want to come back to something I said at the beginning, because I think it matters more than any of the geopolitical analysis. There are American workers right now who are caught in the middle of this auto workers in Detroit whose production lines depend on Canadian parts that are now subject to tariffs. Farmers in border states who built their businesses on Canadian market access and are now watching those markets close. Small manufacturers who never thought about trade policy because it never affected them, and who are now getting crash courses in the difference between tariff theory and tariff reality. These are not abstractions. These are people, and they did not cause this situation. They did not choose this situation. They are living inside it. Whatever I think about the decisions that led to this moment, my first thought and my last thought are with them. Every concern I have raised tonight is not about political positioning or historical legacy. It is about the human cost of strategic miscalculation. The worker in Toledo who cannot get a straight answer about whether his plant is going to absorb the tariff costs or reduce his hours. The farmer in Minnesota who planted his crop based on market assumptions that no longer exist. The small business owner who signed a supply contract 6 months ago that now puts her underwater. They deserve better than this. They deserve a trade policy built on strategy rather than personality. They deserve a relationship with Canada that reflects 30 years of genuine mutual benefit rather than a narrative about winners and losers, that serves the politics of the moment rather than the interests of the people. Here's what I'm asking. I'm asking Congress to do its job. Trade authority in this country constitutionally flows through Congress. The tariffs that are causing this disruption were imposed using executive authority that Congress has the power to reclaim. I'm not saying Congress should run foreign policy. I'm saying Congress should assert the institutional role the founders gave it as a check on exactly this kind of unilateral economic brinkmanship. I'm asking the administration to tell the American people what success looks like. What is the specific measurable outcome that ends this standoff? What does Canada have to do? What does the United States have to offer in return? What is the framework? Because begging without a framework is not negotiation. It is just begging. And I'm asking every American to understand that trade policy is not an abstraction. It is the stability of manufacturing jobs. It is whether the car you want to buy is available at the price you can afford. It is whether the farmer in your state can sell his crop. It is intimate and immediate, and it affects your life whether you're paying attention to it or not. This democracy does not belong to one party or one president. It belongs to all of us. And a trade war with Canada, with our closest ally, our largest trading partner, a country that sent soldiers to fight alongside ours in 2 world wars and in Afghanistan. That trade war has cost that every American is going to pay one way or another. I have always believed that America's greatest strength is not our economy, though it is the largest on earth. It is not our military, though it is the finest the world has ever seen. And it is our capacity to correct course, to look at a situation clearly, acknowledge what is not working, and make the adjustment. We have done it before on trade, on alliances, on strategies that stopped making sense. We can do it again, but only if we are honest about where we are. Only if we are willing to say that a president begging Canada and getting rejected on camera is not a minor diplomatic awkwardness. It is a signal. It is a signal about the limits of pressure without strategy. A signal about what happens when you treat allies like adversaries long enough that they start to act like adversaries. A signal about the difference between strength and the performance of strength. Real strength, the kind I saw up close for 8 years in that office. The kind that actually moves the world is not about who blinks first or who sounds toughest in front of a camera. Real strength is building relationships that are resilient enough to survive disagreement. Real strength is having a strategy that outlasts a news cycle. Real strength is the kind of power that compounds over decades because the people you need are genuinely with you rather than quietly looking for the exit. Canada just told us something important, not about Canada, about us. About what we look like from the outside right now, about the gap between how we see ourselves and how we are being seen. I hope we are listening. I hope someone in that building on Pennsylvania Avenue is sitting with what happened in that room and asking the hard question, not who won the moment, but what does this mean for the next 10 years? Because the next 10 years of North American economic integration, of allied cohesion, of American leadership credibility, those 10 years are being shaped right now by decisions being made right now. Let us get this right. We owe it to the workers caught in the middle. We owe it to the allies watching from a distance. We owe it to the institutions that generations of Americans built so that no one president would ever have to beg and no one country would ever have to choose between dignity and partnership. Let us get this right. Thank you for listening. And God bless the United States of America.